The control stick trembled in my left hand. My right hand held the pistol steady, aimed directly at my co-pilot's eyes. Then, from the cargo hold, came a small voice. A North Korean colonel, one of the regime's finest pilots, had just flown a military helicopter across the 38th parallel. The question is why? Today, I'm going to lay out the full truth. If this story moves you, please subscribe and leave a like. The altimeter read 200 meters above sea level, low enough to watch treetops blur beneath me. The dark ridgelines of winter hills streaked past my window, and in the distance, something glinted above the pale horizon. I knew what it was. The fence, the southern border wire of the Democratic People's Republic. The line I had spent my entire life sworn to protect, now a barrier I was willing to die to cross. It gleamed in the cold outside my window. My left hand was shaking. Not my right hand, the one gripping the pistol. That one was steady, unnervingly so. The muzzle of my Type 64 pistol was aimed in a straight line at the co-pilot's seat. At the eyes of Lieutenant Ri Myung-guk. Alert eyes. Eyes that had broken free from the sedative 2 hours ahead of schedule and were watching me without flinching. Colonel O. His voice didn't shake. Somehow, that was more frightening than if it had. Turn the aircraft around. I said nothing. I pushed the control stick another 0.3 degrees south. The altimeter dropped to 190. That's when it happened. My headset erupted. Not soon in air traffic control. This was the State Security Department's emergency frequency in 17 years of service. I had never once received an unsolicited signal on that channel. And now, a voice poured through it. Colonel Oh Sung-chol, turn that aircraft around immediately. The moment you defy the Supreme Leader's orders, your family will be. Then came the next words. Already arrested. The world stopped. The feeling drained from my left hand. My heart skipped a beat, then hammered back at twice the speed. Already arrested. Already. The words ricocheted off the soundproofing inside my helmet. Sun Young. My wife, Sun Young. Right now, she could be strapped to a chair in some basement interrogation room at the security department. Dad. A voice. Not from the headset. Behind me. The cargo hold. Through 6 layers of military-issue blankets, through the soundproofing where I had hidden that small body wedged between cargo straps, a 7-year-old voice broke through. Low, terrified, but unmistakably my son Jun-hyuk. Dad, I'm scared. Lieutenant Ri's eyes faltered. Only then did he understand. There was a civilian on this aircraft. A child. Colonel, are you out of your mind? Ri slowly moved his left hand toward his holster. I raised my muzzle half a centimeter. That was enough. His hand stopped. Outside, the fence was getting closer. Altimeter 175. Airspeed 150 miles per hour. By my calculations, 47 seconds until we cleared that wire. And after that, whether I lived or died, I was never coming back to this sky. Never back to the airspace of the Republic. Never back to the city where Sun Young was. The headset crackled again. Oh Sung-chol. Final warning. Jun-hyuk. I didn't pull off the headset. I couldn't, because they had said my son's name. The fact that they already knew it meant one of two things somewhere. My plan had leaked, or Sun Young, under interrogation, had number. That wasn't it. Sun Young knew nothing. I had told her nothing. Dad. From behind me again. Smaller this time. More fragile. How had I come to this moment? How does a decorated colonel, the lead pilot of the Supreme Leader's personal escort formation, end up pointing a gun at a fellow soldier? Why did I have to tear apart, with my own hands, the oath I had signed with my blood? That story began exactly 1 year earlier. A fall evening in Pyongyang. Chapter 1. Pyongyang. Autumn. The Taedong River was always beautiful. Especially in autumn. That light just before the water hardened to pewter, the color of 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sun barely touched the surface at an angle every time Colonel Oh Sung-chol leaned against that window and looked down at the scene below, he rebuilt his certainty that he was one of the chosen. Apartment 11, Floor 11, Moranbon District, Pyongyang, reserved for senior officials. How many people in the entire republic could look down at the Taedong River from this height? You could count them on one hand. And the fact that he was one of them that had always felt as natural to Sung Chol as breathing. Born 1975, graduate of the Mengyongdi Revolutionary Academy, 17th class. Top of the National Aviation Corps Flight Training Program. Youngest officer ever promoted to major. And now, at 48, colonel. Lead pilot of the Supreme Leader's personal escort formation. Every line on his service record shone like a medal. Sung Chol believed that shine came from his own ability. He was half right. He was, in fact, an exceptional pilot. Low-altitude night infiltration, mountain ridge evasion maneuvers, emergency landings in deteriorating weather. No flight instructor ever had to show him the same thing twice. He saw it once, and his body remembered. That sensitivity in his hands was innate, something no one could take from him. But the other half? That came from bloodline. His maternal grandfather, a third-generation anti-Japanese partisan. His father retired from the Korean People's Air Force as a lieutenant colonel. His mother a guidance officer in the Central Committee's Department of Culture. From the moment he was born, Sung Chol was already inside the thickest layer of the core class. It was an invisible hand that had guided him to the Mengyongdi Academy, to the Aviation Corps, and into the sky directly in front of the Supreme Leader. He had never once been aware of that hand. The way a fish doesn't notice the water it swims in. From the kitchen, the sounds of his wife Sun Young preparing dinner drifted in. The clatter of a pot lid, the rhythm of a knife, and between those sounds, his son Jun Hyuk's voice murmuring in his room. Jun Hyuk had just turned 7 and was practicing reading picture books by himself. When he hit a word he didn't know, he'd stop, try to sound it out, get it wrong, and stop again. The sounds of that small, determined effort floated all the way into the living room. Sung Chol stood at the window listening. The Taedong River spread out before him. This is happiness, he thought. Or rather he simply knew it. An unquestionable fact. He began to doubt that happiness exactly 3 days later. It started at a mission briefing. October 2023, Sub-Level 3, Special Operations Conference Room, Sunan Airfield. Under fluorescent lights that felt especially cold that day, Sung Chol received a new mission regulations document. It wasn't thick 3 sheets of A4 paper, but as he read through them, the tips of his fingers went cold, slowly, from the ends inward. The document's title, Revised Operating Regulations for the Supreme Leader's Escort Formation effective October 2023. The core of it came down to one thing. If an incident occurred during escort duty for any reason, whether mechanical failure, weather, or pilot error, all personnel aboard the affected aircraft would be transferred immediately to the State Security Department upon mission stand down. And their families would be subject to collective punishment. Sung Chol read that sentence 3 times. Collective punishment. Family. Transferred. Lieutenant Colonel Kong Chol Bong, seated beside him, whispered low. You remember Colonel Park Mu-yun? The previous lead pilot? Emergency landing last October due to engine failure wasn't even the Supreme Leader's aircraft. Sung Chol nodded. Park Mu-yun. He remembered. A good pilot. You know where his family is now? Kang's voice dropped lower. Yodok Management Center. Political prison camp. Sung Chol's expression didn't change. That was the rule of this world. You don't make expressions at rules. The moment you do, it becomes suspicion. Suspicion accumulates into surveillance. And at the end of surveillance, Yodok. He signed the document. His hand didn't tremble. That night, he came home and stood outside the doorway to Jun Hyuk's room for a long time. He didn't open the door. He just stood there, watching the thin line of light that seeped beneath it. He didn't yet understand why that light felt so precarious. But his body knew. Behind him, Sun Young asked, "Why aren't you going in?" He didn't turn around. Just, he said. She didn't ask again. After years together, she knew when her husband didn't say something, there was a reason. In this country, there were things it was safer not to know. That silence carved the first crack between them. Chapter 2: The Envelope. The envelope wasn't red. That was the strange thing Sung Chol kept returning to, every time he replayed that moment. For a document that would upend his life, it was unremarkable. A plain manila envelope, the State Security Department stamp, printed on the front, left on his desk without ceremony. When he arrived at work that morning, it was simply there, as if someone had placed it quietly in the night. Early November 2023. He paused before opening it. Looking back, that pause meant something. Maybe his body already knew that as long as he didn't open it, nothing had changed yet. But he opened it anyway. Not opening it wasn't an option. Not in this world. 2 pages inside. The first page: Internal Surveillance Report, Subject Oh Sun-young, Moranbon District, Pyongyang. His eyes stopped at the first line. Oh Sun-young. His wife. 12 years of marriage. The woman who endured 16 hours of labor to bring Jun Hyuk into the world. The woman whose hands fastened his uniform buttons every morning, one by one. Her name was typed in the subject line of a State Security Department surveillance report. His fingers pressed the edge of the paper. The white tips went whiter. The report was concise, dry, in the manner of surveillance operatives, nothing but facts. Over the past 3 months, Oh Sun-young had made contact on 4 separate occasions with an unidentified ethnic Chinese merchant named Wang, near the Tonggol Street Market in Pyongyang. The meeting location changed each time. The items exchanged were unconfirmed, but after the 3rd contact, a marked increase in the subject's carried cash was detected. At the 4th meeting, the subject received an envelope. Contents currently unknown. He read it twice. He couldn't read it a 3rd time. Something collapsed inside his head. Not an actual sound, but he heard it clearly: the slow settling of an old building's inner wall, crumbling along its cracks. Sun-young. Why? He turned to the 2nd page. This wasn't a report. It was a directive. Recipient: Colonel Oh Sung-chol. Sender: Bureau 7. Pyongyang Division, State Security Department. 3 lines. The above subject, Oh Sun-young, is currently under continued internal investigation. In connection with this matter, Colonel Oh Sung-chol is obligated to report the subject immediately and cooperate with separation procedures. His level of cooperation will be recorded as material for Colonel Oh Sung-chol's own loyalty assessment. His level of cooperation will be recorded as material for his loyalty assessment. Sung-chol read that sentence and leaned back in his chair. He looked up at the ceiling. The fluorescent light stabbed his eyes. He didn't look away. His mind was going blank, or rather, it wasn't going blank. It was filling up, too much pouring in at once, until he couldn't process any of it. Report his wife. If he didn't, he would fall under suspicion himself. If he did, what would happen to Sun-young? The document offered no answer. But Sung-chol already knew. 17 years of service had shown him enough. People who were taken in by the security department and came back whole, that almost never happened. He opened his desk drawer. Deep in the back, folded up, was a family portrait Jun Hyuk had drawn in the spring. Crayon. The biggest figure in the center was Dad, the one next to him was Mom, and the small figure between them, arms stretched wide to hold both their hands, was Jun Hyuk himself. All 3 mouths curved upward toward the sky. Sung-chol didn't take the drawing out. He just looked at it. There, in the drawer. Then he closed it. That evening, he came home and looked directly at Sun-young's face. She seemed unchanged, or at least, she appeared that way. She fed Jun Hyuk dinner, washed the dishes, let the state propaganda broadcast play as background noise while she knitted, hand-stitching the insignia patch she was making for Sung-chol's dress uniform sleeve. "How have you been lately?" Sung-chol asked. Sun-young looked up. Their eyes met. 1 second. 2. Something passed between them in that brief moment, something that couldn't be put into words, but traveled on a frequency that only exists between 2 people who have shared years together. Fine. Same as always. She looked back down at her needles. Sung-chol didn't press further. That night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, He asked himself for the first time, if this is a country that demands I report my own wife, what exactly have I spent my whole life protecting? The moment that question lodged itself in his mind, it couldn't be pulled out again. Chapter 3: Surveillance. The moment you know you're being watched, you change. The way you walk shifts. The rhythm of your breathing shifts. The habit of glancing casually out windows disappears, replaced by a calculation every time you approach the glass. What angle are you visible from? From the day after he received the Security Department documents, Colonel Oh Sung-chol began to change this way. He didn't notice it himself, but his body knew. That's what survival instinct is. The body starts moving before the mind has made a decision. His commute changed. On the military bus to Sunan Airfield, instead of watching the scenery outside, he watched the people inside. Who was looking in which direction? Who was sitting too naturally? Because in this world, too natural was actually the suspicious signal. The more trained a person was, the harder they tried to appear ordinary. Sung-chol had learned that across 17 years. Now that knowledge was turning back on him. The same inside the airfield. When Lieutenant Colonel Kong Chol-bong approached him in the briefing room with a little too much warmth, Sung-chol smiled while running calculations. Is this man watching me, or is he just a colleague? When Lieutenant Ri Myung-guk sat down beside him in the dining hall, same thing. The angle of the food tray, where his eyes moved, the timing of lifting a spoon, everything could be a signal to read, and everything had to be read. Sung-chol lost his appetite, but he didn't leave food on his tray. Having no appetite, that too could be noticed. Home was harder. Sun Young hadn't changed, or didn't appear to, but now Sung-chol had to see his wife through two sets of eyes simultaneously, as her husband, and as a surveillance operative. The bag she carried when she went out seemed bigger than usual. After phone calls, her expression went subtly flat. At night, when Sung-chol lay still and feigned sleep, he'd hear her tossing for a long time before getting up and going to the kitchen. Was she getting water, or something else? He never went to check, because the moment he checked, it would become real. He told himself that not knowing was a way of protecting them both. A week passed, then another. The turning point came through Jun-hyuk. A Sunday afternoon in mid-November. Sung-chol was sitting in his study with a flight manual open in front of him, thinking about something else entirely. More precisely, he was running calculations. Not a plan yet, not really. Just spreading a mental map, measuring distances, gauging the thickness of possibility. Distance to the Yalu River. Distance to the Tumen River. The helicopter's operational range. The coordinates of radar blind spots. The door opened. Jun-hyuk, something in his hands. He walked over and set it on his father's desk. Sung-chol's heart stopped for a beat. A map of China. He had kept it folded in the inner pocket of his military coat. He didn't know when Jun-hyuk had found it. The boy tilted his head. Dad, what's this? The writing looks weird. Chinese characters. Place names in Mandarin, dense across the surface. For 3 seconds, Sung-chol said nothing. Those 3 seconds stretched like 3 years. Two thoughts collided at once. If this child showed this to someone. And what do I say to him? That's Dad's mission map. He kept his voice level. For flying. Don't touch it. Jun-hyuk nodded. He turned to leave, then stopped and looked at his father. 7-year-old eyes. Eyes that didn't yet know the world's danger. But eyes that knew. Somehow Dad was different lately. Dad, why are you always worried? Sung-chol had no answer. Are we going somewhere? In that moment, Sung-chol understood. The boy already sensed it. He couldn't explain what had changed, but the air in the house was different. His father's eyes were different. Children know these things. The harder adults try to hide them, the more precisely children detect them. Sung-chol placed his palm over his son's head. That small, warm skull. Hair that still smelled like a child. We're not going anywhere. Dad's just tired. Jun-hyuk nodded and went back to his room. Sung-chol refolded the map of China and pushed it deeper into his coat pocket. And thought, I cannot raise this child in this country. Not in a country where he'll grow up to receive an envelope ordering him to report someone's wife. Not in a country where he'll grow up to sign security department documents with his own hands. That night, for the first time, Sung Chol made his decision to escape. Decision felt too grand a word. It was less a decision than a confirmation that no other option remained. The way a man at the edge of a cliff stepping forward can't be called brave, this wasn't bravery. There was simply no more road behind him. Outside the window, the first snow of the season had begun to fall. Watching white shapes descend through Pyongyang's night sky, Sung Chol thought about Sun Young. Can I bring her with me? I have to, but if I tell her she'll be in danger. The security department was already watching her. The moment Sung Chol spoke his plan aloud, it could leak. Not through any intent of Sun Young's. In this country, even walls had ears. I can't tell her, but I can't leave her behind. He stood at that crossroads for a long time, until the first snow had all melted. Chapter 4: The Plan. Every perfect system has a crack. That's not a designer's mistake. It's physics. Radar works by sending out radio waves and reading the reflections to detect objects. But radio waves travel in straight lines. Put a mountain in the way, and the area behind it becomes a shadow. A ridgeline creates a blind spot beneath it. No matter how densely you lay a radar network, you cannot erase the shadows that terrain creates. The engineers at the Republic's Air Defense Command knew this. They knew, and couldn't fix it. No radar has ever beaten geography. Sung Chol had the locations of those blind spots memorized. 17 years of service, 6 of them in the Supreme Leader's escort formation. He had flown the Republic's skies hundreds of times, Sunan to Wonsan, Hamhung, Senwiju, Haizen, tracing the routes of the Supreme Leader's field inspections. Along the way, he had absorbed the radar network's layout into his body. Where to drop altitude to disappear from a screen. Which ridgeline to hug to reduce detection time. This wasn't classified knowledge. It wasn't written in any flight manual. It was the knowledge that only someone who had spent hundreds of hours in that sky could carry in their hands, in their gut. But that alone wasn't enough. Even if he traced the radar shadows south, the Republic's air defense grid was built on overlapping coverage. One radar misses, the next one picks you up. Drop to low altitude and hug the ridgelines, but the moment flat terrain opens up, something will catch you. And the moment you're caught, the scramble order goes out. MiG-29s go up. After that, there was nothing left to calculate. The problem was the transponder. A transponder is the device that tells radar who an aircraft is. Military aircraft carry an IFF identification, friend or foe. When radar pings, the IFF responds, I'm friendly. My code is this. At that moment, the aircraft on the radar screen is automatically classified as non-threatening. Instantly, automatically, the Supreme Leader's escort formation had been issued a special IFF code. Top security clearance, refreshed monthly. Any aircraft transmitting that code in the Republic's airspace was automatically excluded from radar tracking completely, automatically. This was by design, a security measure to prevent the Supreme Leader's movements from being recorded. The logic: if anyone could dig through radar logs to see where the Supreme Leader had traveled, that possibility had to be cut off entirely. Sung Chol knew that code, because he was the lead pilot, and he also knew what would happen if an aircraft transmitting that code turned south. The air defense radar would not track it. No intercept order would be issued. At minimum until someone detected the anomaly and intervened manually. How long would that window be? He calculated. The moment the Supreme Leader's escort formation began its approach into Sunan airfield, the control tower's full attention would be on managing the formation's landing sequence. Even if the lead aircraft broke from formation and turned south, as long as the IFF code was live, no alert would appear on any radar screen. From the moment a controller visually noticed something wrong, worked through the reporting chain, and the Air Defense Command issued a manual tracking order at minimum 30 seconds. At maximum, 30 seconds. He turned that number over in his mind. At 150 miles per hour, A helicopter travels roughly 1 mile in 30 seconds. From Sunan airfield to the southern border, the straight line distance was about 100 miles. 30 seconds wasn't close to enough. But that wasn't what he was calculating. What if he used radar shadow zones and the IFF code simultaneously? Flying low along the ridgelines, maintaining the IFF code as he moved south, the geographic blind spots where radar couldn't reach would overlap with the electronic blind spots that radar ignored even if it could. Two blind spots on top of each other. Inside that overlap, he would be, for all practical purposes, invisible. He opened the map, not the physical one, the map in his head, the aerial topography of the Republic, inscribed into him over hundreds of flights in 6 years. Pyeongsan Ridge, the Sinchi Highlands, the elevated ground north of Yeoncheon. Connect those three zones, and the low-altitude shadow corridor runs almost unbroken. Flying that route with the IFF code active, he estimated he could buy up to 4 minutes before the defense network detected an anomaly. 4 minutes at 150 miles per hour, 10 miles. Still 90 miles short of the border from Sunan. But, Supreme Leader field inspection return missions didn't always start at Sunan. The origin varied with the destination. If the departure point was near Kaesong, the distance to the southern border dropped dramatically. From Kaesong to the area around Cherwon, the straight line distance was less than 25 miles. When that number hit him, Sung Chul felt his heart accelerate. 25 miles, reachable in under 4 minutes. Two problems remained. First, Lieutenant Ri Myung-guk. As long as the co-pilot was in that seat, Sung Chul couldn't take full control of the aircraft alone. Ri was a soldier with a strong sense of loyalty. Persuasion was impossible. Bringing him along was impossible. That left one option. Second, Jun Hyuk. He had to get his son onto the aircraft. But bringing a civilian onto the airfield on mission day was impossible. He would have to hide him in the cargo hold. Could a 7-year-old boy endure a military helicopter's cargo hold, hidden behind soundproofing without making a sound, for 2 hours? Sung Chul didn't write these problems in any notebook. The act of writing was itself evidence. Instead, he burned them into memory, replayed them before sleep each night, pulled them out each morning and turned them over, worked through them during meals. Ri's coffee, sedative, medical officer connection, the vulnerability in the airfield's cargo intake procedure, checkpoint timing, the rotation schedule of the sentry on duty, what to dress Jun Hyuk in, what position to hide him in, how long he would need to hold out. It took 3 weeks for the plan to take shape. The night it came together, Sung Chul breathed easily for the first time. Not because the fear was gone. If anything, the fear was sharper. But now there was a direction. A place to run toward. Fear with a direction stops being fear. It becomes fuel. One obstacle remained. The Supreme Leader's next field inspection itinerary. It had to be near Kaesong. Sung Chul waited. Then, 12 days later, in the briefing room, Senior General Pak Dong-hyok announced the next mission, and one word drove into Sung Chul's ear like a nail. Haiju, South Gwangha Province, 70 kilometers southwest of Kaesong, far south of Sunan, much closer to the border. Sung Chul pressed his pen into his briefing notepad. The ink bled. No one noticed. The mission date 3 days away. Chapter 5, The Last Night. People are most beautiful when they don't know it's the last time. Sung Chul spent the entire night before the mission thinking about that. Listening to Sun Young prepare dinner in the kitchen. Listening to Jun Hyuk in his room, stacking blocks and knocking them down. These sounds, these smells, this warmth, by this time tomorrow, they would be gone forever. Sun Young didn't know. Jun Hyuk didn't know. And the fact that they didn't know was, for Sung Chul, a weight almost too heavy to carry. Dinner was ready. Doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean paste stew. Sung Chul's favorite. Sun Young made it sometimes for no special reason, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. But tonight, the smell hit differently. Rich and warm, it drifted from the kitchen all the way to the living room, and Sung Chul pulled it deep into his lungs. He needed to remember this. This smell, this kitchen, this evening. Jun Hyuk ran to the table first, already opening his mouth with spoon in hand. Not yet. Sun Young smiled and lowered his spoon. Sung Chol watched, the way his wife's hand wrapped around his son's wrist. Sun Young's hands were always cold all those years of washing dishes. But Jun Hyuk beamed anyway, caught in those cold hands. Children take cold hands as warm when they belong to their mother. Sung Chol managed 3 spoonfuls. They wouldn't go down easily. But he ate. He had to eat like it was a normal night. Tonight could not look like anything other than an ordinary evening. Mission tomorrow? Sun Young asked. Yeah, escort duty. When will you be back? Evening, probably. A lie. By tomorrow evening, Sung Chol would never set foot in this apartment again. Not ever. But his voice didn't waver. 17 years of service had taught him more than how to fly. How to manage your expression. How to keep your voice flat. That training was now running in reverse. Sun Young nodded and spooned more side dishes into Jun Hyuk's bowl. Bathing Jun Hyuk was Sung Chol's job. In the bathroom, pouring water over his son's head, Sung Chol looked at the back of Jun Hyuk's neck. The fine down along the nape. The small, perfect curve of his ear. The hair that still smelled like a child. The thought that these were the last things he would be able to touch with his own hands moved up through his palms and into his chest. Dad, too hot. Sorry, he added cold water. Jun Hyuk squinted and smiled. This smile, this expression. Sung Chol blinked. He wanted to burn it into his retinas, so he could pull it out even in a place where there was nothing else. Toweling Jun Hyuk's hair dry, he said, Jun Hyuk, yeah? You have to listen to Dad. You understand? Jun Hyuk turned and looked at his father. Eyes that sensed something off. Children know these things. Why? Just because. Whatever happens, you listen to Dad. Jun Hyuk thought about it a moment, then nodded. Okay, but are you leaving early tomorrow? Yeah. Can I come? Sung Chol's hands went still. The hands holding the towel. Jun Hyuk didn't know anything, and yet he had just asked exactly what would happen tomorrow. Can I come? It wasn't that he couldn't come. He had to. He absolutely had to. That was the entire reason for everything. Not tomorrow. Next time. A lie. There was no next time. After tucking Jun Hyuk in, Sung Chol stood in the doorway and looked one last time at his son's sleeping face. Tomorrow before dawn, he would wake this boy. Without a word, he would wrap him in military blankets and carry him to the car. On the drive to the airfield, the boy would be frightened. And then he would be hidden in a cargo hold. Alone, in the dark. With nothing but his father's voice to hold on to. That thought caught him by the ankles. He stood in the hallway for a long time, unable to move. Sun Young was knitting in the living room, stitching the rank insignia onto Sung Chol's dress uniform sleeve, something she did every year around this time. Even when new insignia came in from the military, Sung Chol insisted that hand-stitched ones held better than anything bought at the market. Sun Young never seemed to mind. She liked it, even. She seemed to be thinking something, working the needles. That quiet time was hers alone. Sung Chol sat down beside her on the sofa. Neither of them spoke for a while. The state propaganda broadcast murmured from the television some factory had exceeded its production quota. Sung Chol listened to that noise and watched Sun Young's profile. 12 years together. How many times had he looked at that face from the side? Thousands. But tonight, it felt like the first time. Strange and precious at once. Her hands moved. The needle pushed through the fabric and pulled through the other side. The thread drew taut. Sun Young. She looked up. What? There was too much to say. So he could say nothing. I'm sorry. I love you. I know you're in that security department file. That's why I can't take you with me. I know that leaving this country without you is the most cowardly thing I'll ever do. But Jun Hyuk, I cannot leave behind. Every one of those sentences tangled in his throat and wouldn't come out. Nothing. Sun Young held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her eyes, that look a wife gets when she knows her husband is lying but understands why he can't speak. She didn't press. She had lived too many years in this country to press. Sometimes silence was the only way to protect each other. She picked up her needle again. Sung Chol watched her hands. Those small, cold hands. Stitching. Will I be able to hold them one more time before tomorrow? He wanted to reach over. But he was afraid that if he took her hand, he wouldn't be able to let go. So he didn't. At 2 in the morning, Sun Young went to bed first. Sung Chol sat alone in the living room. He didn't turn off the lights. He took in this room the wallpaper, the pale glow of a street lamp coming through the kitchen window, the stain on the ceiling, the corner of the wall where Jun Hyuk had scrawled with crayons and it had never quite come off, the dried water mark on the balcony tiles where Sun Young had splashed while watering her plants. At 4 in the morning, he stood up. He dressed in his uniform. The insignia Sun Young had stitched was on the sleeve. He ran one finger across it, then walked to Jun Hyuk's room. He woke his son. Jun Hyuk rubbed his eyes. "Dad?" Sung Chol said nothing. He lifted the boy into his arms. Jun Hyuk pressed his face against his father's shoulder and closed his eyes again. This weight, this warmth. Sung Chol closed his eyes and opened them. At the front door, he turned back. The bedroom door at the end of the hallway was closed. No light came through the gap. Sun Young was asleep. She would wake up and he would already be gone. No goodbye, no last look. He said it silently. "Sun Young, I'm sorry. When Jun Hyuk is grown, I'll tell him everything." Then he closed the door. His footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then the elevator. Then the building's front entrance. Then silence. Pyongyang's streets were empty in the pre-dawn dark. Street lamps bled yellow across the white snow. Sung Chol walked to the car, Jun Hyuk in his arms. His son's breath touched his neck, warm and even. From somewhere near the Taedong River, the pre-dawn wind came in. He didn't look back. If he looked back, he couldn't go. Chapter 6: The Crossing. Time is a strange thing. On ordinary days, hours flow like water through open fingers. But in the moments that brush up against death, 1 second stretches into a year. Each heartbeat comes in sharp and clear, and in the fraction of a second between one blink and the next, dozens of thoughts cross at once. On that afternoon, 575 feet above the earth, Colonel Oh Sung Chol was living through the longest 47 seconds of his life. The Supreme Leader's motorcade began its return from the Haiju field inspection at 2:30 in the afternoon. The escort formation moved as scheduled. Sung Chol's Mi-17 led the way. 2 rearguard aircraft held position behind. Cruising altitude 2,600 feet. Airspeed 135 miles per hour. Everything by the book. Radio contact with the control tower normal. IFF code response normal. Sung Chol tried not to tighten his grip on the control stick. Too much tension travels through the hands, into the aircraft, and the aircraft's subtle tremor. Lieutenant Ri Myung-guk, seated beside him, could feel it. Lieutenant Ri was asleep. In the thermos of coffee Sung Chol had handed him before takeoff, a sleep aid was dissolved, obtained from Medical Officer Major Cho Sung-jin, who hadn't asked any questions. When Sung Chol told him he was struggling with insomnia, the major simply handed it over. In this country, when a colonel asked, a major didn't question. That custom was working in Sung Chol's favor now. Ri drank the last of the coffee about 40 minutes after takeoff. 20 minutes after that, his head began to drift forward. Sung Chol confirmed it in his peripheral vision and kept his eyes straight ahead, as if nothing were happening. And he began. The first step was altitude. He brought it down gradually from 2,600 feet naturally, to 2,000, still within regulation tolerance. Then faster, 1,600, 1,300, 1,000. As the ridgeline closed in, the aircraft shuddered. Winter ridge winds are unpredictable. Sung Chol read each gust through his fingertips and made micro-corrections on the stick. 17 years had been building toward this. 575 feet. He held it there. The second step was heading. He began drifting from the return route. 2 degrees. 5, 10. The gap between him and the rear formation widened. The rear pilot detected the deviation and attempted contact. Lead aircraft, confirming current heading deviation. Please respond. Sung Chol didn't answer. He pressed the stick further south. Lead aircraft, respond. Lead aircraft, silence. After 3 attempts, the rear formation held its own course. Their mission was to escort the Supreme Leader's motorcade. They couldn't peel off to chase him. That, too, was inside his calculations. The third step was the transponder. The moment he turned south with the IFF code active, the Republic's air defense radar would not flag this aircraft automatically, but that only held as long as no controller was actively watching. The moment someone spotted an anomaly in the track, everything changed. He checked his watch. 3 minutes since the rear formation gave up on contact. By now, they had reported to the control tower. The tower had escalated to higher command. Time remaining before Air Defense Command initiated manual tracking under a minute. That's when Lieutenant Ri Myung-guk's eyes opened. The sedative had worn off early. At first, Ri didn't seem to realize he had been asleep at all. He rubbed his eyes, looked out the window. The altitude was wrong. The heading was wrong. The ridgeline was too close. And the compass, it was pointing south. Ri's eyes went wide. Colonel Sung Chol already had the pistol drawn. Type 64. Safety off. Muzzle aimed at Ri's left chest. Their eyes met. Ri spent 1 second reading the situation. Altitude, speed, heading, pistol. Then he reached his conclusion. The color drained from his face. Colonel, you're not. Stay quiet. Sung Chol's voice was flat. Not emotionless, there was too much emotion. So much that his voice went flat on the other side of it. That was the moment. The headset exploded. State Security Department emergency frequency. The channel that had never, in 17 years, transmitted first. Colonel Oh Sung Chol, turn that aircraft around immediately. The moment you defy the Supreme Leader's orders, your family will be. And then, already arrested. Sung Chol's heart skipped. Sun Young. He had expected this. He had accepted this possibility from the moment the plan took shape. But knowing something and actually hearing it, those are two entirely different things. His vision swam. No, the aircraft had lurched. His left hand lost its grip for an instant, then caught again. The altimeter dropped from 575 to 525 feet. He pulled back on the stick. It climbed back to 575. Dad, from the cargo hold. Jun Hyuk, through 6 layers of military blankets. Behind the soundproofing. Alone in the dark. Dad, I'm scared. Something welled up behind Sung Chol's eyes. He fought to keep his vision clear. A pilot cannot afford blurred vision. But he couldn't stop it. Lieutenant Ri's eyes wavered too. He had heard the child's voice. Only now did he understand there was a boy on this aircraft. And this colonel had set all of this in motion for one reason. Colonel Ri's voice had changed. The command edge was gone. Low, unsteady. Turn back. It's not too late. I can look the other way. Lieutenant Ri. Sung Chol cut him off. I won't make you choose. That's the only thing I can still do for you. Ri said nothing. Outside, the border fence came into view. Rusted wire catching the winter sun. And beyond it, a different world. The world Sung Chol had spent his whole life learning to call the enemy. But in this moment, that world was the only place his son could live. The headset again. Oh Sung Chol. Last warning. Jun Hyuk. Sung Chol turned the dial. International emergency frequency 121.5 MHz. And transmitted. Republic of Korea Air Force. This is a North Korean military aircraft requesting defection. Do not fire warning shots. There is a child on board. I repeat, there is a child on board. No response. 5 seconds. 10. The fence blurred past the window. Sung Chol tightened his grip. He said his son's name, silently. He drew his wife's face behind his eyes. And he pushed the aircraft south. Further. Just a little further. Chapter 7: The Fight. Lieutenant Ri's hand shot toward the control stick. Sung Chol caught it in his peripheral vision. 0.3 seconds. That was how long before that hand reached the stick. His body moved before his mind did. His right elbow swung and knocked Ri's wrist sideways. At the same moment, the pistol in his right hand swept across toward the controls and the balance broke. The aircraft rolled left hard. The altimeter dropped from 575 to 425 feet in seconds. The warning alarm fired sharp, repeating, filling the cockpit. Sung Chol grabbed the stick with both hands, but his right hand still held the pistol. He pulled with the left alone. The aircraft clawed its way back toward level, but altitude kept bleeding. 360 feet, 295 feet. Ri came again, this time for the gun. Their hands locked. The cockpit was too small. An elbow hit the instrument panel. Something cracked. Sung Chol twisted Ri's wrist and simultaneously stomped the rudder pedal. The aircraft yawed right. Both men lurched left. Ri's back slammed into his seat. Then it came. From the cargo hold a scream. Jun Hyuk's scream. The aircraft's roll had thrown him loose from between the cargo straps. The blankets had come undone. Somewhere in the dark back there, a 7-year-old boy was tumbling. Jun Hyuk. It wasn't a calculated response. It came from somewhere below thought. Lieutenant Ri froze. At that scream. At that child's cry. For 1 second his hand hung in the air, suspended. That 1 second changed everything. Inside that second, Sung Chol took full control of the stick. Left hand pulling the nose up. Right hand bringing the pistol back on Ri. He clenched his jaw and hauled the altitude back. The nose came up at 260 feet. Through the windshield treetops. Not almost. Actually, the landing gear scraped branches on the way up. The sound of metal meeting wood. Sung Chol bit down harder. Pulled harder. 330 feet. 395 feet. 490 feet. The aircraft climbed. Lieutenant Ri didn't resist again. He sat back against his headrest and stared out the window. His face held something that was neither rage nor fear, something else. Sung Chol had no time to read it. But later, much later, when he thought back on that expression, it wasn't resignation. It was closer to understanding. Lieutenant Ri, Sung Chol spoke without lowering the gun. Do you have children? Ri didn't answer. If you do, you already know. Silence. Then the response came through 121.5 MHz. North Korean aircraft. This is the Republic of Korea Air Force Central Control Center. We have your track confirmed. State your aircraft type and number of persons on board. Korean. The accent Sung Chol had spent decades learning to call the enemy's tongue. But in this moment, that voice was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He transmitted back. This is Korean People's Army Air Force Colonel Oh Sung Chol. Requesting defection. Aircraft type Mi-17 helicopter. Persons on board 2 crew, 1 child. Child is 7 years old. I repeat, there is a child on board. Do not fire. 3 seconds of silence. North Korean aircraft. Maintain current altitude and reduce speed. A guiding aircraft will approach. Cease any hostile action and your safety is guaranteed. Sung Chol exhaled, and then he saw them. Out the left window, out the right window. Simultaneously, 2 fighter jets slid into position on either side of the Mi-17 wingtips, bearing the unmistakable roundel of the Republic of Korea. F-15Ks, massive, lean aircraft, flying far faster than the helicopter yet somehow holding perfect formation alongside it. He could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. Clearly, the pilot turned and looked at Sung Chol. Sung Chol looked back. 2 pilots, eye to eye through separate panes of glass. No words, but something moved across that distance, a signal that said not a threat. The F-15K's wings rocked once. Follow me. Sung Chol moved the stick to follow. Lieutenant Ri watched the F-15K out the window, then closed his eyes. Sung Chol saw it, the eyelids coming down. He knew, roughly, what Ri was thinking. Home, family, whatever came next. The route that allowed no return. The border he had crossed against his will. Lieutenant Ri, Sung Chol said, "I'm sorry." Ri didn't open his eyes. But he spoke, quietly. "What happens to my family?" Sung Chol couldn't answer. There were no words for it. No one in this sky could answer that question. Both men already knew what the Republic did to the families of defectors. The silence was the answer. Ri asked nothing more. He closed his eyes again. Outside the window, unfamiliar terrain scrolled past. The southern sky was the same color as the northern sky, pewter winter gray. But the land beneath it was different. "Dad," from the cargo hold, not the scream from before. Small, quiet. "Dad, where are we?" Something welled up behind Sung Chol's eyes again. This time he didn't hold it back. There was no reason to hold it back anymore. He was somewhere no one would file a report on his tears. "We made it." His voice broke. "Dad's here." The two F-15Ks led the way ahead. In the distance, a runway appeared. Osan Air Base. Along both sides of the strip, fire trucks and ambulances were staged and waiting. Red lights turned in the flat winter afternoon. Sung Chol began his landing sequence. Gear down. Branches had scraped it, but it held. Flaps adjusted. Speed reduced. Altitude bled off. Every movement was by the book, the same motions he had performed hundreds of times across 17 years. But this landing was unlike any other. The runway came up fast. 160 feet, 100 feet, 30 feet. The moment the wheels touched down, Sung Chol closed his eyes. Just for a second. Less than a second. In that brief darkness he saw Sun Young's face. Smiling. The way she had looked in the Pyongyang apartment living room, knitting, her face turned slightly away. Then he opened his eyes. The aircraft stopped. Outside, the sound of ROK Army soldiers running. Fists against the helicopter door. A voice through a bullhorn, speaking Korean. Sung Chol listened to all of it, and took his hands off the control stick. For the first time, since leaving Pyongyang, for the first time he let go. His palms were soaked. His knuckles had gone white. He had held on so hard he couldn't open his fingers. Slowly, one by one, he uncurled them. Then he turned toward the cargo hold. Behind the soundproofing, wrapped in military blankets, a small shape was curled and still. Sung Chol reached out his hand. "Jun Hyuk, come out." The blanket moved, and from inside it Jun Hyuk emerged. Hair tangled, tear tracks down both cheeks. One corner of a military blanket still hanging off his shoulder. The moment he saw his father, his lips began to tremble. Sung Chol pulled his son in. Both arms, everything he had. Jun Hyuk pressed his face into his father's chest and wept without sound. Sung Chol wept without sound. Two people crying in silence, their grief swallowed by the noise outside. No one heard. That was enough. Someone knocked on the door again. Sung Chol, his son still in his arms, turned to face it. The door opened. Cold winter air poured in. And beyond it an unfamiliar sky. The sky of the south. The sky Sung Chol had spent his whole life learning to call enemy territory. But in this moment, it was just sky. Gray winter sky. And inside it something that could be called free air. He held Jun Hyuk tighter and stepped out. Chapter 8: What Freedom Looks Like. Freedom arrived in handcuffs. The moment the helicopter door opened, 4 ROK Army soldiers came up into the aircraft. Black tactical gloves reached for Sung Chol's arms. The signal was clear: set the child down first. Sung Chol didn't. Not instinctively. It felt like setting Jun Hyuk down would sever some invisible thread that had held, all the way from Pyongyang to here. "The child is safe," a Korean army officer said in Korean. "You can put him down." Sung Chol understood. The accent he had spent decades calling the enemies, it was the same language. Different intonation, different vocabulary, but the meaning of "the child is safe" that came through with perfect clarity. He set Jun Hyuk down. The moment Jun Hyuk's feet touched the ground, both his fists closed around his father's uniform trousers. Holding on. A female medic stepped over and placed a hand on Jun Hyuk's shoulder. A gentle hand. Jun Hyuk looked up at her. Then, slowly he let go of the trousers. That was when the handcuffs went on Sung Chol's wrists. Cold metal closed around them. A click. Sung Chol didn't resist. He knew this was procedure. He had expected it more or less that this was how they would receive a defector. But when the weight of that metal settled on his wrists, something strange moved through him. This was not captivity. The things that had bound him in the Republic loyalty oaths, collective punishment laws, the Security Department's surveillance web, the air that demanded silence compared to those, this metal was almost honest. It was visible. It was on his wrists, not inside his chest. Sung Chol stepped down from the helicopter. Osan Air Base's runway was under his feet. Cold winter wind hit his face. -17 Fahrenheit. But the cold wasn't foreign. Pyongyang winters were just as brutal. Same peninsula, same winter. Lieutenant Ri came down too. Handcuffs on his wrists as well. Their eyes met briefly. Ri's eyes were empty, not angry, not bitter, just hollowed out. Sung Chol looked away first. He had already said he was sorry. There was nothing left. The Joint Chiefs of Staff interrogation room was underground. Fluorescent lights, metal desk, cold chair. Sung Chol sat and answered questions. Name, rank, unit, circumstances of defection, North Korean radar network, IFF code structure, escort formation, operational methods. The questions came without end. Sung Chol answered everything. He held nothing back. There was nothing to hold back. He had already crossed the river, already crossed the line. The idea of rationing this information, using it as a bargaining chip, never entered his mind. He was too tired for that kind of calculation. The hardest part was not knowing where Jun Hyuk was. Even answering the interrogator's questions, half his mind never stopped thinking about his son. Was he eating? Was he crying? Was he somewhere among strangers, looking for his father? Were his hands warm? Was he frightened? On the second day of questioning, the interrogator showed him a photograph. Jun Hyuk, sitting in front of a meal tray, eating. Full cheeks, spoon in hand. Whatever the food was, it wasn't visible. But in that photograph, Jun Hyuk was not crying. Sung Chol looked at that photograph for a long time. Thank you. That was all he could say. On the fifth day, the interrogator spoke. There's been a contact. He placed a phone on the table. Connected through a National Intelligence Service channel. Keep it brief. Sung Chol picked up the receiver. At first, static, then breathing. Sung Chol knew from that breathing alone. Sun Young. A short silence. 1 second. 2. Then a voice. Honey. Sun Young's voice. But different. Lower than he remembered. And surprisingly calm. She wasn't crying. Her voice wasn't hoarse from tears. Just still. Like the bottom of deep water. I'm glad. That was her first sentence. I'm glad. The moment those words landed, something locked up in Sung Chol's chest. He tried to speak. Nothing came. Jun Hyuk is okay? He finally managed. Yeah. He's okay. He's eating well. That's good. Another silence. Sung Chol said her name. Sun Young. He didn't know what he was trying to say. I'm sorry. I love you. I'll come for you. Every sentence surged up his throat at once. She spoke first. Tell Jun Hyuk his mom is fine. Then, the line went dead. Click. Sung Chol held the phone to his ear for a long time. Receiver pressed to the side of his head. The call already gone. Nothing but static. The interrogator quietly took the phone. That night and for 3 nights after, Sung Chol wept. Without sound. Blanket pulled up over his head. The interrogators didn't know. The guards didn't know. Or if they did, no one said a word. On the morning after the 3rd night, Jun Hyuk came to visit. The door opened and that small figure walked in, holding a guard's hand. The moment Sung Chol saw him, he threw off the blanket. Jun Hyuk saw his father and ran. Climbed up onto the bed. Pressed his face into Sung Chol's chest. Dad, why were you crying? Your eyes are red. Sung Chol tried to smile. It didn't quite work. Dad wasn't feeling well. Where does it hurt? Sung Chol pressed his hand to his chest. Here. But he didn't say that. Jun Hyuk placed his palm against his father's tear-stained cheek. Cold hands. Just like Sun Young's. Sung Chol covered that hand with both of his. Trying to warm it, Jun Hyuk said, "Dad, you said Mom was okay." Sung Chol nodded. "Yeah, Mom said she was okay." It wasn't a lie. Sun Young hadn't said she was okay. She had said "I'm glad." Whether those meant the same thing he didn't know. But those were the last words she had chosen. The words she had asked him to pass on to their son. That much, at least, he would deliver exactly. Jun Hyuk closed his eyes in his father's arms. He was asleep within minutes. The sound of his steady breathing pressed against Sung Chol's chest. Warm. Sung Chol held that warmth and looked out the window. Through the narrow interrogation room window, a winter sky. A small window. But the sky was wide. Somewhere in that sky, Sung Chol thought, Sun Young was beneath it too. Same sky, different ground, enduring the same winter. He spoke to that sky, silently. "Wait for me. I will say your name on this soil. I promise." Jun Hyuk's hand found his father's. Sung Chol held it tight. Epilogue Spring. Seoul's spring smelled exactly like Pyongyang's spring. The first time Sung Chol realized this, he stood perfectly still for a long moment. A small park on the slopes of Namsan Mountain. April, the cherry blossoms just beginning to open. Wind came through and dropped a few petals on his shoulders. The smell that reached him then, earth and flowers tangled together, was identical to the smell of spring in Pyongyang's Moranbong Park. Wind carried the same scent across the border. Sung Chol stood there and cried for a long time. People walking by glanced over. No one stopped. That's the kind of city Seoul is. A city where everyone carries their own grief alone. At first that felt cold to him. But with time he came to understand that was one form of freedom. You could cry. You didn't have to explain why. You didn't have to file a report with anyone. In the Republic, even tears needed a reason. Personal grief, anything other than national mourning for the supreme leader's passing, could become grounds for suspicion. But here, you could just cry. Because a spring smell reminded you of your wife. That was enough. 3 years had passed. March 2027. A Defector Resettlement Support Center in Mapo District, Seoul. The lecture hall wasn't large. 30 folding chairs arranged in a half circle. A lot of people sitting there. But every time Sung Chol walked into this room, his palms went damp. The most nerve-wracking moments since the day he landed at Osan Air Base were here, in front of this platform. The audience filed in. Defectors. People who had arrived in the South in the past few months. Still in the middle of their Hanawan orientation program. All different ages. Young men barely past 20. Middle-aged people close to Sung Chol's own age. And women who had come alone. Mothers who had come holding children's hands. Every time Sung Chol saw those mothers, his gaze dropped for a moment. He tried not to think of Sun Young. He always did anyway. Jun Hyuk took his usual seat beside the platform. Now 10 years old, Jun Hyuk had grown comfortable with the Seoul dialect. Friends at school had softened his accent considerably. Sometimes he mimicked his father's Pyongyang intonation and giggled about it. That laugh was the most precious thing in Sung Chol's world. That this boy could laugh. That alone made it worth everything worth breaking through that sky. Jun Hyuk opened his notebook. Taking notes during his father's talks had become his habit. At first Sung Chol told him not to. Why is a kid writing this down? Jun Hyuk had answered, "I'm going to show Mom someday." After that, Sung Chol never said another word about it. He stepped up to the microphone. "Hello." His voice moved through the microphone and spread across the room. The audience went quiet. "My name is Oh Sung Chol. I was a colonel in the Korean People's Army Air Force. In December 2023, I flew a military helicopter across the border during a Supreme Leader escort mission and defected." A small murmur moved through the room. People hearing this for the first time. Sung Chol was used to that reaction. But what came next after 3 years, after saying it dozens of times, he still wasn't used to. I am not a hero. Silence fell. I am a coward who left his wife behind. Someone's breathing changed in the audience. Sung Chul felt it, a shift in the air that no microphone had to catch. For 17 years I served the regime faithfully. I signed witness papers on execution orders. I closed my eyes while neighbors were dragged away. I was complicit. I was one of them. He paused, looked at the white wall. Nothing on it. But for Sung Chul, something was there, the dates on those execution orders. The names. But the eyes of my 7-year-old son changed me. In his eyes, for the first time, I saw myself clearly. I understood that I could not raise this child in that country. I could not let that system make him into what it needed him to become. His voice wavered. He let his eyes drop for a moment, then lifted them again. My wife is still there. Because of me. The price of what I chose, she is paying it, not me. That is a weight I will carry for the rest of my life. There is no way to make it lighter. Somewhere in the room, a sound. Quiet crying. More than one person. Sung Chul didn't look. If he looked, he would break too. But he placed both hands on the edge of the platform. I will not let Sun Young's name disappear from this earth. That she existed. That in our last phone call, she asked about our son before she said a single word about herself. That the love behind that was enormous, heavier than anything I can measure. I will say these things. Here, from this platform, for as long as I can stand. The room was silent, not an empty silence, a full one. 30 people were filling it with everything they had left behind. Parents, siblings, spouses, neighbors whose names they might never know again. Faces they might never see again. Sung Chul didn't break that silence. He stayed inside it with them. After the talk, people began to leave. A few came forward. One man extended his hand for a shake. One woman couldn't speak, she just bowed her head, deeply. A middle-aged woman took Sung Chul's hands and held them for a long time. He didn't pull away. He knew what those hands were saying. When the last person had gone, only Sung Chul and Jun Hyuk remained. Jun Hyuk closed his notebook and walked over, folding up a chair and pushing it aside. He stood beside his father and said nothing. Just stood there. Sung Chul placed a hand on his son's shoulder. In 3 years, these shoulders had grown considerably. Still a child, but becoming, slowly, something more. Dad, yeah, a lot of people cried today. Yeah, Jun Hyuk thought for a moment. Mom would want us to live well. Sung Chul didn't answer. He couldn't. Only Sun Young knew whether that was true. But he couldn't say it was wrong either. In their last call, she had said those words, I'm glad. He had spent 3 years turning them over, trying to understand them. He still wasn't certain, but he couldn't say that live well wasn't somewhere inside them. He squeezed his son's shoulder once, then let go. Let's go. They walked out of the lecture hall together. Down the hallway, down the stairs, out through the building's front entrance. March in Seoul, wind blowing, cold, but with spring threaded through it. Sung Chul looked up. Seoul's sky. It felt lower than Pyongyang's sky. Not actually lower, just the feeling. Close enough to reach up and touch. The sky he had broken through at the cost of everything, on that day 3 years ago, was now just sky. Not a threat, not a surveillance apparatus. He spoke to it, silently. Sun Young. Jun Hyuk filled another notebook today. The boy you loved has grown up like this, eating well, making friends, laughing sometimes in a way that startles me. I'm still sorry. That will never change. It will never change for the rest of my life. But that last thing you said to me, I'm glad. I take it out every single day. I look at it until it's worn through. Until it's frayed. It's what puts me on that platform. It's what makes me say your name. Wait for me. When this land becomes one, I'll be the first one running. Jun Hyuk took his father's hand. Sung Chul held it tight. They walked through the streets of Seoul, into the spring wind, forward,